Chaverim Shalom. My name is לשגיא מלמד, and it's very exciting, almost moving to start this conversation. It's the second time. I will give you some background in a minute, but let's first thank everybody who's here, the philanthropists from around the world, and the NGO leaders. And also remember that tonight we begin the fast of Av, which reminds us every year the destruction of the temple, and more important, why was the destruction of the temple. So this conversation, to a great extent, even if a little bit, contributes to unity, to collaboration, to kindness, and to empathy between all of us, no matter where we are and what our roles are. Before I continue, please make sure everybody's on mute except for the speakers. And I would like to share with you the background for this conversation, this Zoom conference. In April, I was conducting interviews for my new book, Mindful Fundraising. And I was speaking to Maya, interviewing Maya, the director of Committed to Give. And halfway through the interview, we realized COVID-19 brought upon all of us globally a great crisis that brought uncertainty, anxiousness, fear, and a lot of NGOs, a lot of people around the world and in Israel including, were asking themselves, what will the philanthropists do? What would the givers do as far as their philanthropic commitments? Will they continue? Will their priorities change? Will they only give to COVID-related projects? And then we realized that there is no conversation, there's no direct eye-level conversation between the philanthropists on one NGO leadership. And everybody were thinking, asking consultant, asking representative. So we decided, Maya and I, to create that conversation, to create that dialogue. And on May 25th, we conducted a first of its kind Zoom conversation between 9 Israeli philanthropists, some of them are with us today, and about 150 Israeli NGO leaders. And the response, the feedback was so enthusiastic, so encouraging, that we decided to take it one step forward and expand that conversation globally. So today we have with us top leadership, top representative from Britain, from Canada, and from the United States, in addition to more Israeli philanthropic leaders. So one thing Maya and I can promise you, only one thing, this is not the last meeting. We will continue. We already have plans and we welcome your input, your questions, your concerns. Please send it to us. Everybody have our emails, because that crisis, unfortunately, in May we were hoping that by the summer we can reserve flights for vacation, for work-related trips. It's not going to happen in the next foreseeable future. So we want to continue that conversation, continue that dialogue, because together we can do better than each one alone. Maya, please share with us and give instruction on how this conversation is going to be conducted. Thank you.
Thank you, לשגיא. So shalom to everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Maya Lapid, and I'm excited to host this conversation today with לשגיא Melamed. Thank you, לשגיא, by the way, for the partnership. It's a pleasure to work with you. Heartfelt thank you to all our featured speakers, Irit, Shaul, Ruth, Raya, Angelica, Philip, Jim, Shira, Shula, and Becky. I hope I didn't forget anyone. For your sincere willingness to speak openly in this joint conversation with directors and leaders of NGOs, share your perspective and point of view fairly, and listen to the concerns and challenges of social organization. I have the privilege to be the director of יכולים, נותנים, also known as Committed to Give, a unique group of Israeli social funders who work together to sprout new and engaged Israeli philanthropy, to increase the number of wealthy Israelis who donate to social causes. We know there is a gap between the ability of wealthy Israelis to give and their actual giving. That is what we set out to change. We reach out to motivate and encourage wealthy Israelis to start their social philanthropic journey. We know that current funding is not enough to meet the ordinary challenges, all the more so in this time of prolonged local and global crisis. Private funding has a unique role in routine. It promotes social creativity and innovation. It allows R&D and taking risks. Is there an additional role during this crisis or during crisis in general? This and more is what we are planning to discuss today. So a little bit of logistics, how this conversation is going to happen. When you signed up, we've asked you to write questions. So we grouped and phrased 10 key questions.
Can you bring it?
Slicha. Everyone needs to be please mute yourselves. Sorry. Okay, so we grouped and phrased 10 key questions that mainly concern about what has changed during the Corona period and how it will affect donations, fundraising, enduring this crisis, and the relationship between Israel and worldwide Jewry. We will start shortly with a round of questions and answers. Each speaker addresses one question. When the question is asked, a slide with the question and the speaker's title will be displayed as well. And then we will get back to the gallery of speaker view. Following the round of Q&A, we will divide into breakout rooms. You will be assigned to small groups to continue the conversation and enjoy the benefit of a more intimate, open chat. This part will require some patience, as we will make sure that each breakout room has at least one donor or speaker. During this part, also please bear in mind that this chat should not be used for personal solicitation, rather a continuation of issues and challenges that were raised at the plenary parts. We will leave the breakout rooms open to allow enough time. So thank you all again, and let us begin with no further ado. So I will start with the first speaker, Irit Rappaport. I will unmute. Okay, just a second, and I will do the screen share. And a lot of the questions that were sent to us were about what has changed, if at all, during this crisis. So the first question for you is, has your philanthropic strategy, priorities, or giving practices changed? Does this include taking on new coronavirus-related philanthropic investments? So the floor is yours. Irit, toda rabba.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much. It's really, I'm honored, I must say, to be asked, number one, to talk in such a prestigious forum, and to start, which is kind of a little scary for me. But I will take the opportunity to greet and salute my co-philanthropist friends, Angela, that I haven't seen in a very long time, Raya, that I haven't seen either, and Philippe, with whom we speak regularly, but we haven't seen each other. So I don't know the other people, but thank you very much for being here. So to answer your question, no. Well, the first and foremost, my answer is no. We have not changed our philanthropic strategy, because I believe that we need to support those institutions that we supported in the past and that we have been supporting all the way. And I'm not talking about the thing that we have two different ways of our strategy has two different ways. There's the major big investments of the foundation, which is like the new Center for Cancer Research and the Technion and all these, the Hospital for Children, et cetera. And these are things that are Center for art and as well for increase the support that we're giving them, because art and culture is one to be open, the last one to act, and the first one to be threatened. So we kind of thought, and I kind of thought, that it would be extremely important, and you could see it, because the day we reopened the museum over the weekend, we had over 15,000 people. So including children and families. And so, and the museum is a very wide area. And so people were very happy and very delighted that we were still there. Same goes for the opera, for the Philharmonic, for the theaters, so that was the institutional support. And the one with the thought of the after COVID, because it will happen one day. And as I said, I don't know if I already said that, I think that art is a driver of social change. And I think it's something that needs to be taken into consideration. And then there was the one thing that we did on top of supporting the institutions, and I did an emergency fund for the Tel Aviv Museum, to which what we did is we rerouted the funds that we would give to certain acts of art and culture, like for instance, my Shabbat dinner, which is a very, very big expense on my budget. And that, went to start an emergency fund for the Tel Aviv Museum. I rerouted the funds that usually we spend on the ceremony of the prize ceremony, of which Raya was one of the laureates, and I was so honored to be able to give her a prize, in order to support artists, to do an emergency fund together with Karen Rabinovich, to support not only the artists that are, painters, but to support all the people that work in that world, which is the directors and the sound engineers and the singers of the opera. All these that are not, the Philharmonic, for instance, is, they're cooperative, so their problem is a little different. So to answer your question, no, we did not basically change our strategy. We continue to support these institutions that we believe in. Obviously, there are always little things that you have at the end that stay, like for the children of the workers in southern Tel Aviv who needed some stuff for school. You always find that kind of money. You always find, that's small money. But I'm talking about, and thank God that we are blessed with having that money. And as I always say, money comes with responsibilities and obligations, and that, I think, part of it is exactly that. So what we did do, though, is we rather than giving the money when we usually give it, for instance, if Guggenheim gets it in August and we decided, we approached everybody and they said, you really need money for cash flow now? The answer was yes. So we just channeled the money, knowing very well that in 3 months' time, we're going to have to revisit it. Definitely, I'm going to have to go to my trustees and ask them for a rallonge, we call it in French. See if I can get more, especially if, if the opera doesn't reopen and the Philharmonic doesn't reopen and all these things happen. And I think that supporting art and culture in Israel, especially with the mood that people are in right now, I think I won't see it as important as any other thing, but I think it is definitely ranks up there with what you do for the people that you believe in. So I don't know if I've answered the question, and I'd be happy to answer your questions if you think that I've not satisfied you with my response. Okay. Hello?
Shaggy, you need to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Iri, thank you very much. We are not allowing questions because of lack of time, but if people do have questions, please send it by chat, and we will try eventually to address them. And I took from you, Irit, that you are increasing gifts to your organization you already have relationship with, and I saw some saluting in the chatting, so I joined that salute. Thank you for your remarks. I'd like to
Welcome.
I'd like to address the next question to Shaul Silver. Shaul from Toronto. I've known Shaul for many years. His family is a leading philanthropic family, both in Canada and in Israel. I believe, Shaul, you told me one time that many of your family members moved to Israel, but they left you there so they can continue to give in Canada and in Israel. So you're in charge of generating the philanthropy for the rest of the family, so thank you for that. And you know, when this crisis started, us Israelis had to do the switch to remind ourselves that Israel is not alone in this crisis. We were so used to having bombs fall in Sderot and Kiryat Shmona and terror attacks and wars, and everybody wanted to help us. This crisis hits everybody. So if you might share with us, how is Canadian Jewry affected by COVID-19? And how will it influence fundraising efforts and the relationship with Israel when it comes to philanthropic support? Shaul, please, bevakasha.
Thank you, Sergey. In the short time that I have, I'm not going to tell you much about the 400,000 Jews across Canada. So I'm going to focus on Toronto, where about half of the Jews live, including me. Over the years, our community, under the leadership of United Jewish Appeal, UJA Federation of Greater Toronto, has created special campaigns for Israel during many emergency situations, during wartime, the Intifada, to help in the Klita of Soviet Olim and Ethiopians. But this year is unusual, as Sagi said, because for the first time in the memory of most Toronto Jews, the crisis is happening in our own community, not just in Israel. Large donors who are asked for contributions understand exactly what the issues are because they themselves are living through them. Last year, the Federation raised close to 60 million Canadian dollars, around 150 million shekel, and it usually runs its campaign in the last half of the year between August and December. This year, in April, they announced an early start to their campaign and a goal of raising an additional special fund of $25 million. The extra fund was to help the community's agencies deal with the special challenges from COVID-19, a 200% increase in unemployment, large increases in the number of Toronto Jews seeking help for financial crisis, addiction, family violence, seniors in isolation. The special fund was raised in 2 months, and so far over half of the regular campaign amount has already been raised. So how will that affect giving to Israel? First, the Federation itself is using the special fund only for local needs. So although it's raising 42% more this year than last, it's not increasing its allocation to Israel, although it's not cutting it either. Second, for individual donors, the COVID-19 crisis has affected the ability of many members of the community to continue to contribute at their usual level and has created uncertainty among many others. For those Jews who are able to contribute, Corona forces them to balance two Jewish principles, Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Lazeh and Aniyei Ircha Kodmim. And when we talk about Aniyei Ircha, we should keep in mind that Aniyim does not refer only to individuals. It also refers to organizations that, like your Amutot, are facing unexpected challenges to their ability to sustain their activities, or in some cases, a threat to their very survival. Let me discuss two types of organizations that an Israeli audience may not think about. The first is Jewish day schools. The tuition for Jewish schools in Toronto can range as high as $20,000 a year. Many young parents will not be able to afford it, and while many sabbas and savtas may help to pay tuition for their grandchildren, many may not for financial or health reasons. The Federation subsidizes tuition for those in need, but it expects the demand this year to grow substantially. The second is the synagogue. Synagogues in Canada are financed by annual payments from members. The main benefit that members get is a ticket to pray in the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. This year, Orthodox synagogues may not have services on the Yamim Noraim, and if they do, they won't be large enough to accommodate all the members. Non-Orthodox synagogues may have their services on Zoom. but will people be willing to pay up to $4,000 for that? In both cases, the solution is likely to be an appeal to wealthier members of the community or of the particular synagogue to support or even save the school or the shul. So COVID-19 is likely to divert money that would otherwise be available for donations to Israel. But a few points should be noted. We read today about a growing divide between American Jews and Israel. That is much less evident in Canada. There continues to be a strong loyalty to Israel. A larger percentage of Canadian Jews have visited Israel. Our Taglit and March of the Living programs before this spring were very strong. There's a committed Dati Leumi community in Toronto, many of whom have children in Israel, and our Haredi community sends large amounts to Mosdot in Israel. So in closing, I leave you with a mixed message. 4.5 months into the pandemic, Canadian Jews are dealing with uncertainty over the future and are doing their best to meet the urgent needs of their own neighbors and their own community. But the Jews of Toronto and of Canada remain devoted to their brothers and sisters in Israel. The Federation has not cut its overseas allocation, and we, individual donors, to the best of our ability, are standing by our commitments and looking forward to the time, b'meira b'yameinu, when we can physically return to Israel and when our philanthropic focus can return to the people of Israel. Sagi mentioned that we're close to Tisha B'Av. I think it's a good time for me to thank you for the work you do in building up Zion and in caring for its people. Every Shabbat we say, "V'chol mi she'oskim b'tzorchei tzibur be'emunah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu yeshalem scharam." He may have a different definition of scharam than we do. But even at this difficult time, I want to tell you that Canadian Jews will do our best to be his partners and yours. Tiyu b'riim, toda.
Sure, toda rabba. I mean, it couldn't have been more inspiring and touching message than the one you shared with us. I'm sure some of us will take it to their Shulchan Shabbat to recite to others. So thank you for that, toda rabba. And I would like to move to the next speaker, to Ruth. Ruth Green, a leader in UJIA, the umbrella Jewish organization of United Kingdom. And just to share with you, Ruth just joined us yesterday. She took over for Louise Jacobs, the president of UJIA, who, this is what happens in Corona, had to fly today back from Spain to London because England is closing the gates from Spain. Otherwise, she would be stuck there. So she sent her apologies for not being with us, and we thank and we are fortunate to have Ruth Green today with us. Ruth, we spoke last night in preparation for this meeting. Share with us, please. And you guys in Britain had your share of crises, so Corona is only one of them. You had some before. I hope this is it for you. Please share with us how is the philanthropy in the UK look like today compared to before the crisis, and leave the Brexit aside. And what advice would you give Israeli NGOs who have relationship with British philanthropists and hoping to receive either continuing or new financial support in the future? Ruth, vakasha.
Thank you very much. Thank you for asking me to join this initiative. I'm delighted to share with you from the UK perspective and also at the same time to learn from you. As you mentioned, the UK has been going through its own issues for a few years before COVID. With the Labour anti-Semitism issues and the Brexit debates, the community were feeling a sense of insecurity beforehand. But one of the benefits of any crisis is that it encourages people to work collaboratively and successfully together. And when COVID hit, we were better coordinated. We have a Jewish Leadership Council, and it requested that all of its members, so all of the Jewish charities, both Israel-focused and locally focused, would hold off fundraising for a few months, and they launched a joint call for local and national UK Jewish social care services. So everybody agreed to hold off on all fundraising for those few months. This enabled philanthropists, and in the UK there is a very small group of very committed, very generous philanthropists who give to a lot of different causes, to be single-focused. And many of the philanthropists enjoyed the fact that they could trust that this type of federated campaign would distribute the money more wisely and more strategically than they could have done individually. So that's the first change that has come out of this crisis, and I think we'll see it again when new crises occur. There's always been a sense of frustration and stress from the philanthropists in the UK that there are too many approaches to the same people, and a frustration about duplication and a lack of cooperation. There's also been a shift in the community in the UK in wanting to understand impact on recipients as opposed to outputs of NGOs. So that focus is another shift that we've seen in the UK over the last few years. As a result of this new way of thinking about philanthropy, UGIA started an SI3 social impact arm with three aims. We wanted to connect the community and the next generation to an inspiring Israel. And the best way to do that was to get them involved and introduce them to inspiring social entrepreneurs like yourself and to make those personal connections. We wanted to encourage and help NGOs to look at self-sustainability through social investment. And thirdly, it appealed to our next generation of donors that the money would be recycled. And that was a compelling core situation that gathered a lot of interest. So now during COVID, many Jewish donors have had a different experience. The sort of giving and community-minded people who are philanthropists both to Israel and to local causes have become very involved hands-on in local projects, which I'm sure are happening all over the world. So that in this situation, they've helped both with their time and their efforts, as well as their money. And I think this has shifted their thinking about how they see charities and how they see their desire to be involved. Many businesses, as in all over the world, and people have taken a severe hit to their finances. And one of the things that will be very important is to understand and do research before approaching people about what their current circumstances are. So the philanthropy, which was on hold in terms of Israel, is just now starting again. We raise money for Israel, for NGOs, for projects, but also to fund Zionist youth movements and Taglit and Masar to keep the connection to Israel strong amongst the community in the next generation. The other thing that's happened, and I'm sure this is shared worldwide, is that our community fundraising efforts were based on activities, on dinners, on quizzes, on speakers, on lectures, and all these events have had, and including sort of charity runs and events, all of these have been cancelled. And we've had to accept that the giving that happened at these events needs to be encouraged on a person-to-person basis. We haven't at the moment charged for any virtual offerings that we've given, but I think that will happen in the future. So it means that we're expecting this year that the generation of income will be lower. Like most charities or foundations, we have reserves, and this is the sort of time which reserves are used for. And so we've gone into our reserves with the trustees' approval, but we will need to be cautious in our giving until we understand really what the fundraising will be and how low it will be over the next year going forward. So I've been asked to mention what sort of advice I would give to NGOs that are reaching out to British philanthropists. And I've got a few ideas. I think the first one is as I said before, to be aware and knowledgeable about any personal or professional trauma that may have been suffered, understand the individual donor's current scenario and their capacity to give both financially and mentally at the moment. We've had quite a few older Jewish philanthropists who've died in the community, and that's been a knock both in their giving, in the role modeling, and in the whole community. It will mean we'll have new leaders that will come forward, but we don't really know what that will look like yet. We also will need an opportunity to mourn and celebrate their lives when time permits. But for those still able to denote, we're aware that home causes have been at the forefront of people's minds, and there will be now an increased sense of urgency and responsibility to give locally. I think that our donors love it when they're shown impactful examples of the work that have been done collectively and through individual impacts and stories. I think that there's also an expectation to understand where NGOs have cut costs and improved efficiency, to show that NGOs are also responding to the crisis in a responsible manner. And the encouragement of collaboration, of avoiding duplication, sharing resources and helping each other, making joint applications for similar projects will always be met with a more encouraged and sympathetic view. I think that the idea of social investment is going to increase. I think that where there are opportunities for NGOs to look at becoming revenue raising, so social impact investments can be considered, there's likely to be more money available in philanthropy for this sort of model. And I think that the other thing that we're going to find our donors are looking for is an increased involvement, reaching out for advice as well as for money, which makes them stakeholders in the hearts and minds as well as with their wallets. Our Israeli partners have for the past few years been fantastic in helping us to connect with the donors, showing them the impact of their donations and showing that they too are adapting and the pressures that they're responding to. But our final challenge is that we're a country that's very close to Israel, and the community have often gone to visit Israel and seen the projects in action. We can't do that at the moment, and we need to work with all our partners in Israel to think about virtual person-to-person activities, opportunities to talk in the absence of donors being able to come to visit. So finding innovative ways to really connect and involve the philanthropists so that they go on the journey with us all, it will be an important thing for the future. And after this crisis is over, if we've all adapted to be able to keep each other informed and connected in innovative virtual ways, maybe actually we'll end up being in a stronger position and making deeper connections, which may culminate in visits, but not rely exclusively on them. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Ruth. This is a very important, authentic message and voice for us here to hear about the challenges you're facing. Some of them are, of course, shared challenges, and the tips are important and are very similar to the views and perspectives of social funders here in Israel as well, joining us. Let me put on the question. Angelica, your foundation has strong ties to Israel and to Israeli society during every day or during the ordinary days, and also during this crisis, your support stays very strong and sound. So how has your foundation adjusted to meet the new challenges, and has it changed philanthropic priorities as well? So the floor is yours. Thank you.
First, shalom to my dear friends in Israel. You know, we are not together in person, but we're together in spirit because we face the same unprecedented global crisis. We have the same challenges wherever we are in the world. When the pandemic hit, the Berry Foundation's first response was emergency triage. You know, we gave to medical and healthcare first. Just wanted to make sure everyone's muted.
And someone has unmuted itself, so if everyone could please mute themselves again. Thank you.
So our goal was to provide oxygen for organizations we trust who are already on the ground and ready to act. And as of July, we distributed $5 million in emergency grants to address medical and healthcare needs, as well as food and economic insecurity. About 40% of that amount, about $2 million, went to local organizations, and 60%, about $3 million, went to Israel. Here in the US, our grants went to healthcare defenders, local hospitals who needed protective equipment, childcare for frontline workers, telemedicine resources for diabetics who are most at risk, which we did through the Berry Diabetes Center in New York, and through our local diabetes prevention initiative in New Jersey. Here in our community, we focused on vulnerable seniors at the Jewish home. We boosted capacity for local food banks who experienced a 40% increase in demand, and provided a fund for small businesses. We chose to partner mainly with existing grantees local hospitals who were at the epicenter of the New Jersey pandemic. In Israel, through Messer at Sheba in Tel HaShomer, they developed simulation training protocols for medical personnel, set up the first COVID-only hospital in the world, and support from donors like us allowed Messer to purchase a $100,000 mannequin to simulate specific lung conditions. $1 million was provided to Ogun Social Finance, which is Israel's first social finance bank, as loan assistance for small business and nonprofits. And through the JDC ELCA, we provided services, facilitation and coordination for services for elderly in municipalities, in East Jerusalem, in Arab communities, as well as providing digital accessibility for isolated populations. We also gave to COVID research through the Israel Science Foundation and beta testing a digital platform for medical home care in the Galil. Our philanthropic priorities remain centered on strategic priorities of the foundation, with emphasis on geographic focus like the Galil in the north, and in certain mission areas like in diabetes, which is one of our core mission areas. We chose to partner mainly with institutions we've supported over time as an ongoing investment in capacity that we are able to tap in this moment of crisis. Our partners are already aligned with our mission, have a proven track record, and are positioned for long-term resilience to take on challenges ahead. And they should have the capacity for growth. And these partnerships are assets that allowed us to pivot securely to distribute our funding where it can be most effective in mitigating the impact of this crisis. How will philanthropy change in the aftermath of COVID? We know this is just an earthquake before the tsunami. Funders and nonprofits face a long arc of recovery. We're framing our philanthropic response in stages. The first stage of funding for survival, the next stage of funding for rebuilding, and the long-term investment of funding for resilience. The second phase of funding for rebuilding is really more challenging because COVID exposed larger systemic weaknesses, fragility of nonprofits, the lack of government support, the inability to bridge that technology gap. Funders have to expect the messy task of cleaning up, repairing what was broken pre-COVID, things like replacing leadership and staff to improve performance, cleaning up deficits, repairing old infrastructure, filling in fundraising gaps. These are not the sexy parts of funding, but they're investments that we need if we want to make a smooth transition from survival to rebuilding. Nonprofits need to be well managed, financially healthy, properly staffed, and consistently funded to be able to develop and maintain organizational capacities to fulfill their mission. Investing in capacity isn't going to be enough. I think philanthropy has to invest in resilience. Funding capacity helps the organization deliver on its mission today. And funding resilience helps it to deliver on its mission in a very uncertain future. So long-term resilience is what we need the day after. And it will require a lot of listening, learning, and collaboration, but we should have the confidence and the willingness to invest for the long term. Our money is meant for times like this. And in this time of radical disruption, philanthropy's role is not just to give, but to lead. We have to lead and to give fearlessly because leadership is missing from most of our governments, and leadership matters most in a crisis. Great leaders set great examples, and now is the time for us to think big as well as long in order to be able to help each other weather the next crisis. We need to mend our fraying social fabric. We need to bring people closer together with values like equality and inclusion to build a shared society. And we know there's going to be untold pain and suffering in the years ahead. And we need empathy and compassion to create a safer, kinder world, because we are all in this together.
Angelica, thank you so much. I believe that if we were in the same room, there would be clapping in the crowd, because I saw some of it coming online. Thank you for your philanthropic leadership. Thank you for your strategic philanthropic investment. And thank you on behalf of the people of the Galil. I'm from Hoshaya. A special thank you for investing in us in the northern part of Israel. Toda rabba lach. I would like to move to Philip now, Philip Weyer. Philip, you're based in Tel Aviv, but you're a man of the big world. I think you have one leg in Europe, one leg in Israel, and maybe another leg that we don't know of somewhere else. So many of the organizations from day one, from March, are asking themselves, okay, there's COVID-19, there's special challenges, but we are doing something else. We are doing good work that is unrelated to COVID. What should we do? Should we ask for funding? Should we stop asking? Please share with our leaders of NGOs if, how, what way should they approach philanthropies when it comes to non-COVID related philanthropy. Philip, b'kasha.
What you heard just now from my fellow colleague donors and philanthropists from the world is that they all, beside being responsive to COVID, continue their commitment to what they have done before. If it's Raya or if it's Irit, and of course Angelica and the others as well. Yes, you have a strategy in your, if you're a big charitable foundation, you have a strategy, you have your organizations you're supporting for decades, so you have your region, you have your, so you will continue to do that also during COVID. I think that what is important to understand is that if we changed or if we gave more money than we do usually, that extra money was for the COVID causes. And we go back to where we were before, to our core donations and to our passion once we have done our part in the COVID support. I think what we're all a bit surprised or frustrated about is that we thought that, as you said before, Sagi, that it's a temporary thing, that this COVID is for 3 months and then we can go back to normal. And some of us perhaps have already donated so much money in this 3 months period for food banks and for hospitals and all that, that we don't have more funds now to have a long-term COVID plan. And I think that's what is sinking in now, is that we actually need a long-term plan. So yes, I think that to answer the question, so foundations, organizations, charities which are busy in domains which have nothing to do with COVID, like art, like Irit said at the beginning, museums are still museums. Theaters is a different story because they're hit by COVID. Museums are also hit by COVID because people don't go to the museum. But I think that, yes, things which are not connected to COVID will continue to have to fundraise the same way they did in before, and they have to go to the same donors they went before, which have most probably less money to give because they gave more money to COVID temporarily. But next year or in 2 years or in 3 years, we are back to our, some of the donors might switch, but most of them will come back to their core organizations they are giving. So most probably what I ask for the fundraisers is to be patient. Now they can't be patient because their organizations is in dire straits and dire needs of money. So it's need to find new donors will be difficult, and the existing donors are stretched, but ask them to stretch a little bit more. I think we can all stretch. Adit Boaz Ramsey, one of our colleagues, I know that I have lost money this year, and this has just pushed me to give double the money I give usually. So I think that, thank God, I can see the half full glass, and I can continue giving also if it's way and beyond what I usually give, because I still have it better than others. And therefore, I think difficult. We keep money for the rainy day. Now it's raining. So liberate that money.
Thank you very much, Philip, for these advices. We want to do a really, really tiny short break, and I want to, we prepared a really, really short poll with 2 questions that I'm going to share in a minute. We basically want to know a little bit about the participants, the audience that are here with us, the NGOs that are with us on this screen today, on this session today. So we have 2 really, really short questions to ask you. Please feel free to answer. It's anonymously and, of course, voluntarily. We want to get a snapshot of your status refunding during these days. So I launched the poll. I hope you can all see it on your screen. Just choose the answer and submit, and press the submit button. And it will give us an idea how much of the NGOs here do rely on overseas funding, and how much of the NGOs in this program were able to fundraise during this, to fundraise new funds during this time. I hope everyone can see the screen and can answer the questions. I will share the results in 30 seconds. So if people still want to answer the questions, please feel free to do so.
I lost the questions.
Okay, so I'll relaunch the polling again. Okay, can you see the questions again?
Yes, thanks.
If people can vote again, I'm not sure it saved the votings before. Okay, thank you very, very much. Okay, let me show the results, and we will continue to our next question. So as we see, okay, roughly 50% of the NGOs in this session and this conversation have some overseas support. Wow, the majority, let's say over 90% of the NGOs here do get supports from overseas foundations or private donors. And only 4% of the NGOs here were able to raise a lot of new funding, but also the good news is that 60% were able to continue and fundraise during this crisis. So this is also good news. Thank you for participating in this poll and sharing this information with us. We are back to our next speaker, Jim Cohen. Hi, great to have you on board with us. And the question, sorry, I did, sorry, just a second, I'm with you, share screen. Okay, so Jim, in our pre-chat, you mentioned that there will probably be less funding to Israel and overseas in generally. However, the commitment to Israel will stay as high as always. We will appreciate if you will be able to share this or share this understanding, this reality for NGOs here in Israel. So the question is, how does COVID-19 crisis affect Minneapolis Jewish community and the Jewish Federation's priorities? Where is your focus, immediate relief versus responses for the day after? So, and if you can also share with us, Jim, a little bit about the Minneapolis community, Jewish community. So thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. And I should thank you for having the break right when you had it, because it gave me the opportunity to rewrite my notes completely so that I don't repeat anything that the great panelists who have gone before me have said, because I agree with and I'm encouraged by everything that they said. So I'm going to try to turn a little bit so I'm not repetitive for the rest of the group. Just to give a little bit of background, the Minneapolis Jewish community has always been very Israel and overseas focused. We give more of a percentage of our annual allocations overseas than any other federation of our size. Annually, we give 45% of what we raise overseas, which for a community of our size is incredibly significant. The good news is that's not going to change because of COVID or for anything else. As I said to Maya the other day, because of our commitment and our Zionist roots, our annual allocation to Israel and overseas is not expected to go down at all. That's the good news. The bad news is that as a result of COVID, any additional fundraising that we do is really going to be locally focused, and I'll get into that in just a second. At the very beginning of this crisis, at the beginning of March, we recognized that there were two main things that we had to address vis-a-vis COVID. There were two types of funding that we would have to look into. One was simply a replication of revenue that our partner organizations lost, or what I call lost receipts. And the second is programmatic activity that would need to be undertaken in the community that had not been anticipated before COVID, but therefore was not budgeted for. So the difference between an organization that, because they weren't able to raise it, that they would go under if we didn't step in and help, versus an organization that had much more work to do because of COVID that also needed that assistance. And we recognized from the very beginning that Federation needed to be active in both spaces. So within 5 days of our office closing because of the pandemic, my board authorized an encumbrance of $3.36 million to address both of those needs. And we call those phase 1 and phase 2 grants. Part of the good news is that we recognized early on that if we wanted to make our commitments to Israel, particularly and to overseas, we needed to front load those, because as the crisis grew at home, there would be more of a call for us to keep our funds local. So of that original $3.6 million, over 20% of that went to our overseas partners. We were very proud to be one of the first federations to send that kind of money overseas. And we had hoped that we would be a model that other federations of our size would step up and do the same. The bad news is, unfortunately, to the best of my knowledge, that has not happened. And many smaller, mid-sized communities have really had to contract their resources to local. So what are we doing now? We recognize that that $3-4 million was not going to be enough to handle all of the emergent needs that were coming as a result of COVID. And so we launched something that was really unique and a groundbreaking change for how we conducted business in Minneapolis. And I think is an example for how other communities can address not only COVID-19, but other community-wide or peoplehood-wide issues. We established an emergency fund called Kadima, which is designed to address COVID recovery and relief, and also community security. The COVID portion of this is to raise between now and next June $27.5 million. To give you just some context, our annual campaign is just under $10 million. So that is a big row for us to hoe in the next year and a half. But what we did was we made this a community-wide campaign. It's not a federation campaign, it's a partnership. And 22 agencies, synagogues, schools throughout our community signed on to be partners in this. Committees of that group established a allocations process completely separate from the Federation's allocations process, so that everyone recognized that we were truly all in this together, that we would solve it much more efficiently if we actually acted as one, rather than have all 22 of these organizations go out and ask for support from the same group of donors. the collaboration that this has provided and created is really game-changing, I think, for our community. And I think that one of the things that one of the glasses of lemonade that will come from the lemon COVID is that it's going to be very hard to keep us all on the farm once we've seen Paris, to quote the World War I song. This collaboration is not going to disappear. And our ability to tackle community problems from a community perspective will only grow. So that's the good news. Again, from the perspective of our funding for Israel, the bad news is that the only way we could get all of these organizations to participate was a commitment that 100% of the money raised in this Kadima effort would stay local. And I think that's indicative of how additional fundraising is going to shake out in small and medium-sized Jewish communities throughout North America. I want to just focus, our colleague from Toronto raised a couple of very good points about specific local needs that are in crisis, and mentioning the synagogues and the day schools. I want to mention two others just so that our Israeli colleagues have a context as to why the local need in the United States and certainly in Minneapolis is so important right now. Number one is Jewish camping. One of the things that Federation did immediately in Minneapolis was we recognized that if camp couldn't run in the United States, our camps were in dire and urgent need, and if we didn't support them right away, they would go bankrupt. I've learned a lot in the past couple of months about how camps fund themselves, and to make a very long story short, all the deposits and money that they receive in the winter get spent on getting ready for the summer. So when our two largest overnight camps in our community announced that they were not going to operate over the summer, they were on the hook for returning millions of dollars of deposits and money that people had already paid that they had spent to get ready for camp. And so we stepped in and basically funded that so that A, the camps would not go bankrupt, and B, the families that needed that money for other purposes, many of whom had lost their jobs or many of whom had suffered significant financial losses, could have that money back in their pocket. And the second is JCCs throughout the United States. Most of them have been closed since March, just as people may not be wanting to pay synagogue dues if they're only attending shul online or not at all. People are not paying their dues for programs that are simply not taking place. And so we've had to step in there as well. To sum it up, I just want to highlight a couple of the things that we have learned in this process that I think echo some of the things that have been said already, but I think it's worth to repeat them. One of the things that we found early on was that we had to make some very tough decisions, and that for us to make sure that our community was strong and hopefully even stronger after COVID, we had to make tough decisions about which organizations and which partners received this emergency funding. And that meant really looking at the viability and health of those organizations prior to COVID, because all of our donors were saying, we want to support you. We are really grateful that Federation stepped up with its own unrestricted net assets at the beginning. We took a large chunk of our reserve to help out at the beginning, but we're not going to give to Kadima if you're going to fund things the same old way. We want to make sure that things that aren't necessary are scuttled, and we want to make sure that the community is being collaborative and not having a duplication of effort. So we had to make the tough decision early on of not funding two community organizations that we determined were not financially viable before, and that the community could not afford to throw bad money after worse. And those organizations have now been merged into others because they were not viable. And I think that donors in the United States for sure, and I would suspect around the world, are going to hold us all accountable to make sure that this emergency money that we're raising is spent wisely and not just to maintain a status quo if the status quo is not in the community's best interest. And the second thing that we've learned is that, yes, the impact of the dollars that are being raised, or the shekels, or the Canadian dollars, or the euros, or the pounds, wherever we are with Brexit, we need to demonstrate on a regular basis precisely what the needs are. When we tell those stories and we give examples to donors, for example, in our community, our retirement home, it's costing them $120,000 a month to simply test their personnel so they can go in as nurses and doctors and food service people every day, just so they can serve the elderly that are in there. That wasn't budgeted for. When you tell that story, you get a very positive response. So COVID-19 in and of itself doesn't do the trick. You still, in this 21st century age, have to tie the donor to the impact the gift is having. And we've seen that with this, as we've seen with every other initiative that we've undertaken. And hopefully, I trust that we will be successful and everyone will be successful as we continue this effort.
Maya, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, I said thank you and everything, and I was on mute. So thank you, Jim, for sharing your challenges, efforts, and strategy in your federation and community. Our next speaker is Shira Ruderman. Hi, Shira. Shira, you're one of your foundation major goals is to strengthen the ties and the relationship between the U.S. and Israel, between the Jewish community in the U.S. and Israelis. Shira, is it your kids?
Yep. No.
No, so someone's kids, if everyone can please mute themselves again. I thought it was one of your kids, Shira. She has 4 kids, by the way. So that's 4 gorgeous kids. So Shira, so this question is especially for you, custom made for you. Should Israeli philanthropists and Israeli NGOs look beyond Israel's borders to offer assistance and support to Jewish communities? After we heard all those challenges and priorities, how do you think this crisis can be a springboard to strengthening the ties between Jews worldwide and Israelis?
So first, thank you for having me. It is very interesting conversation, and I admire all my friends and colleagues for the amazing work they do. I would like to answer this question in 2 parts. Number one, to say that the world of philanthropy, like this conversation, shows times and times again its importance. The power in philanthropy to be a voice, to be a convener, to be an accelerator, and to strengthen the relationship is crucial. I'm not undermining any other sectors, but I do think that in philanthropy we have the ability to take risks and to have the freedom to operate and respond right away. The second part is that our challenges in philanthropy, in my mind, and I was listening to all of my friends speaking before, is split to local, national, and international, which is the Jewish world. So locally, like Jim mentioned before, it can start from the synagogue, the day schools, and every other Jewish and non-Jewish organization. National goes to the strong national organizations that we have, and international is like our responsibility to Jewish communities in Israel and elsewhere. I think that it's fair to present that because a lot of the nonprofits sometimes think about their immediate need, but a funder has many needs in front of them, and you try to calculate the long term versus the short term, meaning the emergency funds are the short term. Right now, we need to respond to the police, to the hospital, to the hunger, to the food. But the long term is the sustainable models of our, any organization, Jewish and secular, immediate needs or long needs. I don't think can be as successful if we don't understand the importance of the relationship. Like, how do we make it not just a responsive relationship, not just a crisis relationship? We build partnership, and a partnership, requires to learn from these opportunities and from the past, and also define mutual goals for the future. What is it separation between we, meaning the funders, to we, the Jewish people. Because in the Jewish people lenses, I truly think it's like the responsibility is beyond the funders. The mutual, goals that we need to define, the platforms that we all use today are changed dramatically from what we know 20, 35, 50 years ago. So the question is, how do we strengthen the conversation? How do we share knowledge? This is a great example that COVID brought to us. Yes, there is a need of funds, period, but there is also other needs in the Jewish community. How to mobilize people so quickly. We are, unfortunately, in Israel, experts to, understand how to mobilize people quickly. How do we adjust our needs because of the need to be flexible, which is very difficult. I mean, you heard from Jim and others, the Jewish community is organized and is very savvy, and we have our, needs and ways to do our work, and it's more long-term, and you suddenly need to flexible your muscle of ending, changing, mobilizing, switching your ways to build community, which is from getting together to virtual. How do you make it meaningful? How do you feel belonging? How do you understand the support that people need, from the individual to the organizational? So the question is that we trying to answer here, how to make it as an opportunity to strength. I think philanthropy is playing a crucial role in making this happen. I also think that our responsibility is to take it beyond COVID crisis, beyond, because our mutual relationship and depending on each other as people will not end with the stress or the experience of COVID. So the question that I constantly raise, which I know is not necessarily the time that all of us can talk about, how do we learn it from the long term? What does it mean for us to change the infrastructure of how we communicate and how we work together? And there's another aspect which is maybe less popular to mention and to talk about, and I think, Jim, you mentioned a little bit of it in your words. It is an opportunity to check if everything we do is needed, is the right thing, is effective, is meaningful. I think that we are so widely spread, the Jewish people in Israeli society. Every idea needs to be fulfilled right away. And this is an opportunity for us to say, how are we doing our work better? How are we cooperating with each other? How we are making this more sustainable and not just like reliable to get the needs. And it's a hard question to answer right now in time of need. Those that can handle with that, I think, are the philanthropists that can take the time. And because we have the ability to give support now and also think about tomorrow, we have to be responsible to how to do it. So I truly hope that this COVID not just going to bring us together as people, as community and funders. I also hope that it will be an opportunity for us to do what we do better and strengthen our bond beyond the crisis.
Thank you so much, Shira. You personally and your family foundation have been pioneers in educating Israelis and Americans about each other. You've been preaching it and working on it for years. Now, as you said, the challenge is only greater and the importance is so much more important. So thank you for that, Shira.
Thank you.
I'd like to move to Shula Moses. If you can put Maya the slide. And Shula, our question to you is, how is this affects your relationship with the organization that you already support? And if to be more specific, criteria of success, evaluation is always an important element when coming to assess who and how to support. How is that affected now when everything around us changes? How do you measure success? How do you evaluate organizations? Shula, bakasha.
Hello, everybody. I'm very honored to be here with you today. First of all, I would like to say that in this crisis, we philanthropists, we cannot just demand from others and from the NGOs and from the ones that we support. We have to demand and expect from ourselves to be very, very responsible and to take care and to think ahead. And I heard all of this in the colleagues that spoke before me. Also, we need to take our task of being a philanthropist, not only in giving money, as it was already said, but also to support, to reassure, and to help our grantees cope with this situation that nobody expected and nobody foresaw. Another thing is that fear is normal, and we have to transcend it and to have faith in our good doing and in our giving, so that we have to believe that giving more is creating more assets for us to even give more, not to be afraid. So, having said this, we as a foundation are involved in daily activities of our grantees, of our supported NGOs, and of course we immediately addressed them and we worked together with them to see what their needs are, their immediate needs are, so we could advance cash, we could make specific bridging cash to whatever they needed, and also to make adjustment to our long-term planning so as to include the developing needs of their organizations in face of the COVID-19. The criteria with which we can measure the success of the NGO during this COVID-19 period is, first of all, their flexibility, their ability to provide uninterrupted and continuing services to their client during this period, their ability to create and provide specific services to meet the needs of their clients that developed during this COVID pandemic. Also, their ability to adjust the focus of their medium and long-term planning in order to address the core of their activity. And also take into account the shrinking philanthropy pool, which we all heard about it now, for the foreseeable future, and redefine strategic goals, changing cost structure, and developing partnerships. This is one of the criteria that we can look for in the NGOs that receive our support. Also, how they take into account the changing needs of their field of involvement, the ability not to be blinded and not to be immobilized by the pandemic, by the fear of pandemic, and remember their core purpose. Also, for me, it's very important to see how they treated their employees. So many NGOs that had to reduce their activity or close forgot about their employees. And in this period, it's very important not to. And another very short thing that I would like to say is that in Israel, it's true that the philanthropy in Israel is not as developed as it is in the United States or abroad, that we have a shorter experience, a shorter culture in Israel. But I think, and you know, this webinar is hosted also by Committed to Give. So I can say that in Israel, there are many philanthropists, committed philanthropists, and also the young ones joining now in philanthropy are very committed, are very strategic, and I'm very encouraged by their commitment and their contribution. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Shula, and thank you for your leadership in creating and cultivating a culture of giving in Israel. This was your last comment, was very inspiring. And I would like to move to our last but not least speaker before we break into the Zoom rooms, Becky Caspi. Becky, you probably have the bird view of federation world in North America. And you can guide us and advise us on what can Israeli NGOs expect from North American federations. And maybe you can even give us some do's and don'ts during these very sensitive, very challenging times. Becky, bakasha.
Thanks, Siggy, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. There have been an incredible number of great ideas and insights already shared. And I personally have taken a lot of notes, and I guess maybe many of you have too. And believe me, I know I am the last of 10 speakers, so I'm going to be very brief. We've heard today how individuals and foundations are stepping up their philanthropy. My takeaway, giving generously is trending. And that is incredible and inspiring, since we know every single person who is involved in giving has been impacted themselves in some way by how our world has turned upside down. And that's true in the federation world as well. Federations have already raised or allocated $175 million for crisis needs above and beyond our regular campaign, which is ongoing. And while most of that money is remaining in North America, where the situation is very tough, somewhere between $6 and $7 million has been allocated for needs in Israel and around the world. So with numbers like that, it's easy to focus on federations as fundraising machines. But for federations, please remember, raising money is a means to an end. And that end is fulfilling our core mission, building and strengthening the Jewish community, locally, nationally, and globally. First and foremost, federations are responsible for the health and well-being of their local Jewish communities, as both Shoal and Jim referenced. And make no mistake, the weight they are carrying now is enormous. Everything from keeping the local Jewish community centers up and running to making sure the food pantry is supplied so no one goes hungry, and much more, as we've heard today. That's why our focus has been on sustaining critical infrastructure. I think that might be what Jim was talking about when he talked about lost receipts. And definitely it reflects some of Shira's tough choices. And we're also focused on meeting basic needs. All of this when our classic fundraising tools, missions, gatherings, galas, are off limits, just as Ruth described the situation in the UK. So if you ask me, Siggy, what to do and what not to do when considering asking a federation for money now, here's what I suggest. First, do some research. What's going on locally? What are they dealing with? Does your program mirror what they have invested in before? Does it seem like today, now, it's a priority area? Not to you, to them. Is there anything you might do that could be helpful to those you are about to ask for assistance? And at a minimum, I think it would just be good form to reflect that you know the challenge is being managed and to show some empathy. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still okay to ask. And some programs will definitely be funded, as others already have. After all, supporting Israel is at the heart of the federation model. But I think that those most likely to receive grants will be dealing with essential needs, vital services, and keeping critical infrastructures up and running, because they can impact Federation's core mission for the long term, ensuring thriving Jewish community everywhere. So my bottom line, before you press send, imagine how your reader will perceive the request when she looks at it through the prism of what's going on in her city at that moment. But you know, Maya, ultimately, I think that's good advice no matter what's going on. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Becky. thank you, and may God give you the strength to lead and represent in these very challenging times. Before I hand it to Maya to divide you into Zoom rooms, please allow me to conclude this extraordinary gathering and try to summarize in 1 or 2 sentences what I have heard in the last almost hour and a half. I think we heard an honest, very realistic, yet inspiring and encouraging and generous conversation from all the speakers from different points of view. And that reminded me, I was growing up in a kibbutz, Ramat Yochanan, in the 60s and 70s. We were always jealous of the founders of the kibbutz who fought in 1948 in the Milchemet HaShichrur, and then in 67 and liberated Jerusalem. And we said, what about us? What do we have to do? So it's very different, but maybe the COVID crisis, the global COVID crisis, allows each one of us a really big challenge to confront, to aspire to prove ourselves to ourselves and to the rest of the world. And may all this united effort of love and kindness and empathy help all of us, help the state of Israel, the Jewish people, overcome that and come out even stronger than before. Thank you so much for all the speakers, from all the participants. We are not done yet. Maya, please lead us through the Zoom rooms.
Hi, hello, and shalom again to everyone. Once again, thank you so much for what you shared with us and for this authentic voice and message that you bring to NGOs in Israel. What we will do now is